we'll take any questions that anybody may
So
have.
before we start the questions, I wanted to make sure everyone knows one item is that this is not an action item for tonight's meeting. This is going to be at our next meeting. But we do have a chance to ask questions of both our legal counsel and the police department here today. So I want to make sure we're able to answer as many questions as we've got. With that, Trustee Petlicoff.
Okay, as I'm the only board member who has been present during a shooting, I was at the Henry Ford Community College at that time when they had an active shooting. One of the biggest issues at that time was they didn't have eyes inside the building, didn't know where the occurrence was taking place within the building, and it was a very unsafe environment for everyone within the building to try to gauge how to deal with the problem. There's been some mischaracterization of what people think this agreement between the city and the district is. This is not about surveilling our staff or students. It's not about spying on anybody within our buildings. It's about providing an added tool to the toolbox in the rare, and I hope never to be activated, emergency when we need to understand where that emergency is occurring and be able to get our emergency responders, be it fire or police, into the building as quickly and efficiently as possible and protect the lives of not only our staff and students, but the emergency responders, so that they can carry out the mission of taking care of the emergency, whatever it might be. This is not a live feed to the police dispatch department. They are not sitting there watching every building. We have 34 buildings. We have hundreds of classrooms. Nobody is monitoring what's going on a daily basis within those buildings, except the administrators there. I also find it disappointing that there's been some conversation that people think that we as a board do not have the best interests of our staff and students at heart, and that we're looking to create a setup to catch students or catch staff in bad acts. That's not what this contract is about. This contract is strictly for an emergency situation and would only be activated under those circumstances, and it's within our control of going forward to request that activation. It is not at the police department's end or the fire department's end. Central Dispatch would get that information only when we assess there was an emergency that would necessitate it. The other issue is that everybody sitting at this table is a parent, is a grandparent. We all have a vested interest in the safety of everyone in our buildings, and we are not looking to find a way to spy on anyone. And I find it kind of insulting that people took it to mean a contract between the police dispatch would activate that type of scenario, because that is not what this is about. I also want to make sure that they understand that it's not a live feed. We are not having the cameras running 24/7 within the police department dispatch center. That is, nobody's monitoring this. It's only going to be activated when necessary. So I just wanted to clear up some of those misconceptions that are being spread out there, and that we only have the safety of our community at heart, and we are not up to some kind of nefarious sleight of hand here to try to get into the buildings and do something else other than to help support our community.
Trustee Barry.
In the spirit of clarifying, let me clarify one thing here about, we don't want to create fear out there. Henry Ford College, I would like somebody to elaborate on that. We know what happened at Henry Ford College. There was no way possible for that to be, the outcome couldn't have been prevented, no matter how many cameras you had there, how many police officers you had there. The last, and a couple of my colleagues know this, the last person to see those two people alive was my son. And when he called me that day, within 6.5 minutes, I was near the campus. I had to go through police to get down there. We probably had about 10, 12 cars, police cars on campus, had everything closed down. So just want to make sure.
Yeah.
It was a murder-suicide. There was absolutely nothing that could have been done to prevent that.
Oh, I didn't, yeah, that's
Well,
not
I'm
what
not
I
saying
was.
you did, I'm
yeah.
just saying, you said you were Henry Ford. You weren't there, you were on the board when that happened.
I was on the board.
You were on
No,
the
I
board.
was at the no, I was on site at the campus
Okay,
because I
good.
heard, yeah.
Thank God you
yeah.
weren't harmed, but, yeah, I just want to, I don't want to create that, look, it happened at Henry Ford College, it could happen in Dearborn Public Schools. That's, and can't be any further from, anyway. The question for Dr. Maleko is, where do the teachers come in here? I mean, do we have a discussion with them? Were they brought on board? Did anybody talk to them? Do we plan on talking to the DFT? I mean, we just went through, you know, we started this meeting on a great note, thanking our teachers and honoring our teachers. Are they part of this equation? Because they feel, I mean, we've been hearing from teachers. Do we plan to talk to them? Do we-
Yeah, I talked to Jane Mazza about the DFT to clarify what the purpose was, because she was hearing too that it was, just like you were saying, and trustee Petlicoff, that it was gonna be used for monitoring in classrooms. We don't even have them in the classroom, so this is strictly, so I clarified for, you know, emergencies,
We do have them in cafeterias,
cafeterias, yes.
central locations, hallways.
Sure,
I mean, the people in front of me right here, there's no doubt in my mind. We're making a decision here forever and ever and ever. Police chief, nothing but the greatest respect for the man. Everybody standing here, people are gonna change. So we're saying it's never about surveillance, it's never about this or that, but who knows what happens in the future? So this is something that we have to take in consideration too, so.
And that's why we have that opt-out, 30 days.
What's that?
That's why they have the opt-out for, in 30 days. Either one of us can opt out and say, look, there's been a change in administration at the police department. We want out of the contract.
There is a lot of fear out there right now with our staff, with our community members, and I think, again, we're ready to decide this, make a decision next month on this. I think, like anything else, we have to educate people. Whatever we need to do, let them know. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind going to this meeting, I knew what I was gonna vote a month from now. But okay, now hearing some of this information, I gotta think about it. But we need to, I mean, just to bring us back here a month from now to make a decision, I really don't think that's fair to our staff, our teachers, all of our employees, and the community. There's a lot of concerned people in the community, so I think we should slow it down a little bit, educate people, and go from there. Just my thoughts.
Trustee Watts?
So I missed, what is the name of the system that we'd be using? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name of it.
The name of the system is Sonitrol, Sonitrol.
And then are there other school districts who are also using the same system?
Yes, there are. I don't have a list of them with me, but there are other
Okay.
schools that are using it.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. I know that some parents have reached out with some concerns. So I have some questions with that. So in the presentation, it says it would be used for emergency situations. Could you list what those emergency situations would be? Because I think there's some concern as to the gray area, and I think I want to make sure that we know what those emergency situations would be outside of an active shooter.
I'll let the chief answer probably more completely, but medical emergencies, fires, disruptive crowds, of course, the active shooter, and there's probably other instances where you find somebody that's out in the parking lot that's not supposed to be there, that they flip on this, we have to activate it. We have to call the police department for them to turn it on. But those are the sort of situations. If we're calling just because we got a kid speeding to the parking lot in his car, they're not gonna put on the cameras for that.
So I think for myself, I would like to have the list of when we can use it versus when we are not using it. So if we could have the list of saying specifically in these situations, this is when we would then go ahead and give permission to the police, or we would reach out to the police to be able to activate the video. Because I think there's some, people are unsure, and I think when they're unsure, they're filling in the blanks, and I think that's what's causing some fear and some doubt. And the other thing is, on the presentation, it said Unruly Fans, and so I think we were discussed that you had mentioned maybe in a sporting event. Has that been a problem in the past with Unruly Fans?
I don't think here in Dearborn there's been a problem, but there was a famous fight between Catholic Central and Brother Rice at a hockey game last year.
Well, that's
broke
hockey.
out.
I was gonna say, I've been a
Fight
hockey
broke
mom.
out in a hockey game, you know?
So then with this system as well, is there a facial recognition component to that?
I do not know that answer. I don't believe that there is.
Okay. And then the other thing would be, who would have access to the system? For instance, I know that it would be a live feed. I guess, let's take a step back. If, God forbid, if there was an active shooter at a school, what would be what would be step number 1 through step number 12?
There'd be a 911 notification, and we have dispatchers who will be trained how to access the system with approval. There'll be a supervisor on the floor that will monitor the transaction. And in real time, we would get that out to the responders going on the scene.
So then there would be a 911 phone call from the school.
As a rule, yes. It could be an officer in the building that maybe happened to be in the building and goes on the prep radio and says, I have shots fired in the school, God forbid, or something bad. But that would also go to 911, either
Okay.
by radio or phone. How about if we say that?
Okay, so it's not as if there would be a button that somebody would be able to push and not have, so it would have to be, okay, like, not a student just running by the hall pushing a
Right.
button. And then the other question that I have is, it's not currently in the classrooms. We are never planning on putting cameras in the classroom. I just want to make sure, because I think I'm hearing it's not in the classroom currently, and then I'm thinking people are going to say, well, does that mean we're going to put them in the classrooms?
I mean, I don't know that I can ever say never. I don't know how long
Well, I
I'll
guess,
be
is
here.
it part
in
of
my-
this plan? I guess
It
part
would
of
be a
this plan.
decision the board, we would make with the budget if we wanted to, but right now, there's no plans.
Right.
There are no plans to be putting them in classrooms, not for monitoring in classrooms.
Right,
It's-
okay.
It's centralized locations, when we had, and it has nothing to do with the Dearborn Police. We've expanded. When we had vandalism a few years ago on the fields, we put them, directing them to the field for our own purpose, to monitor. So I can tell you that the principals are always asking for more, especially at the secondary buildings, because it does maintain, safety and security for the buildings, so they do use them heavily, but again, they use them without the police. This is just for our own purposes.
Right.
That they're being used. I would just say this, we have a 30-day out clause, and at some point, we have to put trust, because if we get an emergency situation, we need to have that trust, and we do with the SRO officers. Honestly, I can call chief 24/7, in the evening, at night, midnight, and I can call them, and I know who to call. The SRO officers, guess what? Our principals know who to call. That is the relationship we have. It has helped us deal with so many situations since I've been in the school district. I can't say enough. Because you know who that person is, and they're part of your staff, and they're part of who you are, and they're part of your community of your school. It's just a huge positive sense of comfort. And I would imagine that was what I was hearing when we were going around the bond, when parents heard. I would hear the stories of the SRO officers playing football and doing all those things with the kids to build relationships, and that's the model. This is why I'm recommending it, because I'm your superintendent, and this is a safety issue for me. And so I don't want to regret not being here recommending something that could potentially, again, I'm going to say, Trustee Pett, I never, ever want to use this.
We don't.
But I don't want to come back here and say only if I would have and have regret. And that's why, that's my only objective here. It's not for monitoring any classrooms. It's to protect teachers, it's to protect staff, it's to protect students, it's to protect everyone. That is the only motivation. And we have to do other things too. We know, we talked about the statistics with mental health and other things. So we have to do other proactive things. So this is not the only solution. There's other things that we need to do. And we know that to support, our students in our community that are dealing with these issues. Because really, this system will help when there's an active situation. But we also want to take preventative measures. And I think that's where
Right.
the SRO and some of the things we're doing.
It's almost
with
like
Mr.
an
Saley.
insurance policy kind
So,
of thing, where you hope you
let's-
never have to use it, but it's there.
Well, and I think we're going
Well-
back to it's one thing if it's an active shooter.
Let's go back to having our hands up when we're ready to get to the questions.
Well, I was gonna finish up. So I think it's one thing if it's an active shooter, but it's another thing if we're talking about, would we talk about like a fight? Would we be using it if we have students who are fighting in the hallway?
The Dearborn Police wouldn't be involved with that. If we have our own cameras that they're already there, we use them, we currently, just for our staff though, our principals.
And I think that's going forward. I think like if we had more specifics about when we can use it versus when we're not going to use it, I think it would make
I think.
a better understanding.
Because every situation could potentially be different. Obviously, we had the one in the pool 2 years ago. I think the one thing that's probably has to happen, the chief said, is there's gonna be some kind of a 911 trigger. So what do you think of 911? Emergency. So it's not just for, a couple of individuals, maybe horseplay or things like that. That's not a 911 emergency. It would be something that would have to trigger, a 911. What would we call? And I think Mr. Leacher said too, the one thing that we always fall back to, and that's why we practice and train, is because when you're in an intensive situation, adrenaline is moving and nerves, so you go back to what you know. And so you're not gonna have time to think, you just act as to what your training tells you. And I believe that's what the police do. That's why they train so heavily, so.
Trustee Moser.
Trustee Watts, you asked a lot of great questions that I had as well, but I also have a question about now, say the system is activated, do we have a way to document that the police has remoted in and checked out the camera? Because what I fear is, and what others have mentioned, is that this might be abused, that you may have potentially a police officer that may look in or go into the system without approval or without supervision, as the chief said.
And that's a great question. This is something that, the way our system is designed, we're able to see which authenticated user is able to remote in. And that way, we also have a record there to see if someone has been remoting in, if that were to happen like that. So we can always do audits to see if something has happened along those lines. But we usually, this would be something like the chief and Dr. Malego were saying, if it's a 911 emergency, there's no need for the police to just go in like that.
And that was something early on, when we started talking about this, like,
Yeah.
2 years ago, it was a provision that we wanted, that kept coming up at the city relations committee. And it
We
came up
talked
when
about that
Mary
a
Lane
lot.
was the chair of the committee. We discussed that heavily last year. And then obviously when COVID came, and it was under your President Barry, we put it on hold for a little while, but we sent it back to the city relations committee for review. But with COVID was our priority last year, so now that we're phasing back in, we wanted to bring this forward, so.
Trustee Moser, did you have any other items?
Just on the, so are we able to edit this contract before we sign off on it, obviously for next week? Or 2 weeks from
We
now?
still have the ability to amend
Yeah,
it.
we can.
So as far as specifying those emergency situations, I don't think that was clearly stated in the agreement, or it was very vague. So is there a way to have those stated in the contract as well?
We can look at that.
And
put-
as well as the thing that I mentioned about documenting whenever this is being used.
So like a list of example of emergency situation that we would use it for?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
One item I would bring up with that, though, would be this. We know that things are gonna change, and there's a
Yeah.
chance we aren't gonna catch everything the first time through, so that might not be part of the original agreement, but we've got it there as a supplement. And that way we can
I was
amend
gonna
it without
say-
having to change the whole agreement.
If you identify only these specifics and something out of that realm occurs and we want to activate it, then we've violated the contract, so to speak. You don't ever want to make it so rigid in your specifications that you've eliminated some other options by that. I know when I was a charter commissioner, that was one of our biggest conversations, was you have to be a little more general in some of your language when you get into these kinds of contracts, because otherwise, as times change, you've boxed yourself in to only a few specifics.
To respond.
Yeah.
What I want to mention is that there was even a mention of vandalism on that as far as an emergency situation. So we really need to define what an emergency situation is, even to the point of not including vandalism, because I don't think that is an emergency situation where there might be a loss of life.
Trustee Watts?
So out of curiosity, and I know pre-COVID, could you give us an example, and I know it's probably not offhand, how many times, for instance, in a school year, 911 has been called?
Oh, it gets called, I don't even know, David, I don't even know if I can estimate. I mean, we have 911 probably weekly, right? Because it could be a staff, it could just be a medical issue, with a staff.
Ms.
or
Harris is
someone had a
looking it up
seizure.
right now, so she'll be able to give us an answer.
I'm sorry?
Ms. Harris is looking it up.
Oh, okay.
Last year, 75 calls.
75 calls, is that in the last school year?
That was last school year. The year prior was 150.
And 150, that would have been in the 2018,
2018,
19 school year?
When we
So
were actually in the
if we were
building.
saying that the cameras would be able to be accessed every time a 911 call, so we're looking at, you said the previous school year was
50.
150 times the Dearborn police then would be able to access the camera if the 911 call,
I don't think it's an automatic, is
I
it?
guess if 911
It
was
would-
then
I guess
need,
you
or,
would determine what situation, right?
right,
Yeah,
I mean, certain situations may or may not be. needed.
warrant it, yeah.
Because we know that some of the 911 calls are for medical.
Yeah.
right.
Like, we already
So I don't
know, and
think
it's already
that is-
reported, so then we know someone had a seizure, as an example.
This is not like hooked up to a buzzer kind of thing where you dial 911, it automatically turns on
So
the
I
feed to
think we need to go back
dispatch.
to the again, I think there's a lot of that gray area, so I think we need to probably, like what Trustee Moses was saying, is perhaps, kind of more defined, because it's not necessarily triggered by a 911 call, right? So we know it's not gonna be accessed every single time 911 is called. So then the option would happen after a 911 call, but then who would determine whether or not the 911 call would then trigger the video?
I would think it'd probably be at your switch. You guys would determine the emergency. I would think it would be through, depending on what the emergency is, they would determine if there's a need to go in and look, because you have access during an emergency. Obviously, an active shooter, we already
Right.
said that. There could be a medical situation though too. For example, we had staff members administering CPR. I know they were also talking to someone on the phone for the person to be able to see. I would think that would be valuable for first responders on the medical side, for the fire department, as another, example.
Well, I guess what they're asking for is clarification. All right, would it be a building administrator who said, I have to call 911, we've got a fire emergency in the basement? And we need this, or would we
I
be
mean-
calling the IT department then saying, okay, can you get dispatch on and into the cameras? I think that's where they want some clarity
think-
as to who makes that.
I mean, the building principals will then know that that is available, so obviously if it's something, when they're calling 911, depending on the situation, and it may not be an administrator, you could have just a teacher, you could have a teacher or a support staff, it could be, someone that just came in from the public had called 911 too from a cell phone, so, there's a lot of different.
Well, we want to know who would have the authority to then say.
Well, it's set up through the IT department. So it's not like a it's available for any emergency. And through that active directory, right, Bob?
Correct. So they do have access to the Active Directory like that, so.
Come up to the microphone.
Okay.
Through the IT system, they would have access, but they would have to trigger it, right?
Correct.
At the,
They would be able to log in and everything. So I think one of the clear points that we want to make right there too is when dispatch gets the information about what type of situation it is, a determination can be made at that point. Like if it is an active shooter situation, yes, we would want to be able to use the cameras. If it's a non-major emergency, depending on what type of medical situation it is like that, you might want to hold off on that.
But wait, now what you're saying is dispatch would be making the decision, or would we be making? Because the understanding was that we would have the call.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and that was always the conversation that we
Nobody
had.
wants to answer that
we,
question.
yeah, no, and I agree. that we would have the control of telling, dispatch, okay, we want you, able to see, have eyes in the room, so to speak.
And it could be.
But it should be from us,
Sure.
not from dispatch saying, hey, this call, I want to go,
Well-
because that's where then the concern comes. Can somebody
Sure,
from
makes sense.
dispatch be bored and say, I want to, take a look?
It would have to be whoever's in charge at the time in the building, because obviously they'd be close to it, right? Because you're not gonna have time to be getting a hold of us at central office. It'll be, the building principals will have to have that
That's what I'm saying, is
information.
it the building
Or whoever's there,
administrator?
if the
Yeah.
assistant is in charge at the time, or whoever the acting current, principal is at that time would have to make that decision.
Trustee Barry, did you have additional questions?
Yes. I'm still not very clear. Now, we're getting different answers here. We have 33 buildings. You're telling me there's 33 possibly people that can push that button to connect the link? Is that what you just said?
The link is already there, right?
Okay, well,
Bob?
somebody
I
has to
don't
turn
know
it
if
on, right? Somebody has to turn it on. Earlier, you were saying they, I didn't know if you were referring to the police department or the administrators. Who would make that call to connect that link, to turn that link on? From what I understood it, just like trustee Petrikov is, we're making that decision.
So the link is there, right, Bob?
link is there.
It's there, it doesn't need to be turned on, it just needs, somebody just needs
So
to
it's
be
actively
permission.
on then?
It's actively on all the time,
Whoa,
and the
okay.
reason,
So that
and the
gets me-
reason is, just to explain, is because and it was discussed, and this was one of the options that could be there. You could do it the other way, where you could say, but then somebody has to call somebody, and you have to have certain people with that access to be able to, so we could do that. But the recommendation wasn't, because we didn't wanna lose any time, any seconds or times. That's why we're recommending it this way, not to, call me and I then go on to the phone and change it, so that, we're not recommending that.
Dr.
Now, we
Maleko,
could do it, though, we could do it.
yeah, Dr. Maleko, if you bring us a contract saying the only time the police department will have eyes and ears into our buildings is if there's an active shooter, we're done. We can just go home right now. But that's not what I'm hearing tonight. I'm hearing a lot of different answers here. Obviously, this agreement is not public, correct? So we can't get into the meat and potatoes. The agreement says one thing, what we're talking about here, what I'm hearing says something. I'm gonna paint a picture here. Let's say there's a brawl at one of our high schools in the cafeteria. 30 young people are involved. Somebody didn't like the food that day and started a fight. The assistant principal thinks it's out of hand, it's a 911 emergency, let's do this. That's possible. Yes, no?
I mean, it could be possible.
could be
yeah,
possible,
Depending
yes.
on the emergency.
Okay,
yeah.
so if I'm a sworn police officer and I just saw somebody get assaulted, I have a duty to do what I need to do, okay? With our philosophy, we used to have the zero tolerance. Now we got the restorative practice policy that we're following that did some tremendous amount of results for our graduation rates, student success, what have you. When you know what I'm talking about. When you have a middle school student that's suspended for 68 days because she likes to laugh in class or whatever, we're not gonna hold him back in that middle school, and we send him to high school, and as soon as he gets to high school, he leaves, he checks out. That's no longer happening right now because we're doing a great job at Woodworth, at Stout, at Bryant, at Salina, at Smith. We're doing a great job there keeping the students in the seats, okay? So if something like that happens in one of our cafeterias, police officers, by law, I mean, they took an oath. If somebody gets assaulted, they have to come in. Where our assistant principals, our social workers understand our students a little bit more, might handle a little bit differently. So is that, going back to, Trustee Watts, you asked multiple questions, I don't think they were answered. What, I can't get into here, I can't discuss this, but some of the stuff that's in here is not what I'm hearing today,
I mean,
so.
the intent isn't to be using it though, for students. The intent is really just it's for an emergency situation to try to save a student. I mean,
And what
that's
is-
the honest
what is-
intent.
What is considered an emergency? 1, 2,
Well,
3,
if-
4 people have asked that question and we're not getting clear answers. Okay, I'll leave it at
Okay.
that then.
Okay.
Additional questions before I get to mine? Trustee McDonald, did you have anything?
My questions have basically been answered, and I had a lot of the same questions that have been brought up. The one thing that I'd like just a little clarification on it, if you can, we were talking about, there's a 911 notification, and then that goes to the dispatcher and the supervisor. Now, if that system is triggered, just say for whatever reason, and it is a legitimate reason, the system is triggered, what happens next? Does that dispatch talk to the police who are on the scene and direct them? Or, I mean, what steps are in between that?
Yeah, that's a great question. A couple of things will happen. If the dispatcher can determine what's needed at the scene, they can order EMS, a fire truck, or additional backup, and in real time, give the information to the responding unit. So that's what would happen with that information.
Any additional questions, trustee McDonald?
So then after that information is given to the responding unit, that basically cuts off the need at that point, or?
Yeah, once it's under control, there's no more need to get additional information.
Okay,
And-
so if it was a situation, I'm just going back to the active shooter, and then in some of those situations, there's more than one. So you may have somebody at one part of the building and somebody at another part of the building. And then I'm assuming the dispatcher is talking to different officers, directing them to different parts of the building until the situation is under control.
Yeah, best case scenario, that would work that way, yes.
Okay. I too, again, my questions had a lot to do with specifics of emergency and that kind of thing, the things that have already been brought up. So I just want some clarification on those as well. Thank you.
Let me go through my items then. Oh,
I
sorry.
was just gonna say, we can put together a list, if that helps to clarify.
Well, that brings me to one of the things I was going to bring up is, when in doubt, I want our administrators to do what is most cautious, which might mean make the call to 911, so they don't have to worry about that. And I don't think we want them to have to read through a list of these are the reasons that we're giving you permission to call 911. So we do want to keep it a little bit vague. I would like the administrator to be able to work with the dispatcher, just say this is the status of things, and let the dispatcher kind of feel out. That's what dispatchers do. They're trying to determine what's going on, and then have them possibly be able to ask us about having the access. So that was one thing that I wanted to bring up and just make sure that everyone considers on that item. The camera access, this is not gonna be actively monitored, we've said, right? We don't have anyone in the district that's actively watching cameras.
No.
So it's not until we hear from somebody at a building that we're probably gonna know about this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, we don't
Okay.
have staff to be monitoring. I mean,
Okay.
if something were to happen, yeah, then that's when the staff would.
Now,
say-
an example was brought up then I'm gonna about 911 calls, and say that it wasn't somebody that works at the building, or say that it's a staff member or a community member that's in there's something that's going on, they just get on their cell phone. I mean, like, what's our policy for our staff? Do they have to go through a phone in their classroom, or can they just get on their cell phone if there's some emergency and then the police call back to the central office of that building?
I mean, if they have to use the cell, they can, but it's better if they can use their landline, because then we get notifications down here at central office as well, with 911. But in some cases, when you're in an emergency, what is the first thing you might do is you might grab the cell phone.
Well, and we've talked about sporting events. I mean, just say that it's a PE class that's outside. They don't have their classroom, so they've got to do that. And I know this is something that has been talked about at the City Relations Committee, but that's usually in a closed session. So if any of the questions I ask go too far that way, and it's not something we want to put out there publicly, just please let me know. How would the police have access to the buildings? If we're in a lockdown type of situation, they still need some type of access card to get into a building? Or do we have like a button that you can press that opens up doors in a building? Or is that?
That one I may not want to.
That's
They
fine.
have access, but I'm not going to mention
That's fine.
publicly.
That's fine.
Too far.
Well, I knew I was probably gonna get to that point. The other one, Chief, is more to you. One of the things we've got with the schools, we've got a lot of large buildings. So there's other large buildings in the city of Dearborn. Do you have similar things with employers or places, whether it's the mall, the Rouge Complex, the hospitals? I don't know if they've got active police forces, private police forces that are armed, but how do you deal with the other groups in this type of situation?
You know, I'm not absolutely sure that we get a direct feed, but I can tell you, at the malls, for example, you bring them up, they show us the video as soon as we hit the door as to who we may be looking for, what has occurred. They give us a disc right away on all the information, a bank robbery the same way. In a perfect world, we would get all them on board so that our dispatchers could have that information. We haven't got there yet. The hospitals, similarly, when they have an assault that takes place in their ER or in their waiting room, they'll give us the video. So we have a very trusting working relationship. And I can tell you that with everything that the Wayne County prosecutor looks at, they're looking at video now, whether it's the in-car video, whether it's the video for the shoplifter, drunk driver, everything is captured on video. And that's just the way the world works today. And I can tell you that with the schools, the greatest thing I can promise you is accountability. If somebody looks at a video, they're gonna leave a footprint. And if that was unauthorized, we can check them every week, we can check them every day, we can check them every month, whatever's deemed, reasonable to hold people accountable. I think that's a great safeguard. If anybody looks at it, you can't do it in secret. So what's the purpose? And if it was not an appropriate use, then there's consequences for that.
Okay. Trustee Watts?
So just a couple of things, and I know that Dr. Maleko, you had said that there's trust between, the admin and the police department, but I think we need to make sure that we have trust with the parents and the community. And I think that's why I'm asking for the details, because as much as, we have a list and you're saying, the list may not be in all, but we have parents who are sending their children to school and they're hearing the cameras, and God forbid it, I never want our cameras to be used for an active shooter. I don't want them to be used, but things have changed in the last 4 years. I know 4 years ago we were talking about the cameras, and there have been some issues that we've had as parents to discuss with our children about our cultural and social societies and what's happened in the last couple of years. So I think part of it is flushing this out and having these discussions so that parents do know that we're doing our due diligence. And we're saying that this would be used in an emergency, and if 911 was called, who would be the one that would say, go ahead and look at the feed? Is it dispatch? Is it the principal? Is it the assistant principal? Who is that person in charge? Have they had, for one principal in one school, they may deem, yes, go ahead and look into the feed. Maybe another principal would say, no, don't look into the feed. So we need to have some sort of cohesion along our schools to say, okay, this would then trigger asking the police to look at that video. I think these are the things we need to probably flesh out some more.
Any additional comments? Thank you very much, everyone, for, oh, sorry, Trustee McDonald.
I just want to say something. What has been said here tonight, our primary objective is we do have to keep our students safe, no matter what. That's top. We have to do that. But I also do want to recognize what Trustee Berry said, that we also have done a lot in the way of making our students better at what, I'm sorry, I'm having some trouble. Just what Trustee Berry said, we've made a lot of strides on having our students do the right thing, and instead of being, you'll have to excuse me, I'm on a lot of medication. And
Roxanne, are
I'm having
you
some
referring
trouble.
to restorative practice? We're
Yes,
using?
thank you. The
Yeah,
restorative
yeah, I mean,
practice.
that's
I
working.
think that's
That's, I mean, it's working
absolutely.
and we're
So it's a
seeing the
balancing
fruit
act.
there.
We have to be able to have what's in the best interest of our children, not only their safety, but also their security, their mental health, and everything that they're doing forward. And in that way, it's important that we do keep some control over being able to give them what they need and not just punitive is what I want to say. So hopefully I'm clear what I'm trying to say. And again, my apologies.
So I think what we will be doing then is continue to work with the administration and the city to continue to craft the verbiage in any type of agreement that we would consider.
I guess one last question. Is there a deadline to do this, or?
No,
No.
Okay. So there's no grant or anything like that that we're meeting, or?
no, this is a freebie.
No, I'm just
Yeah.
make sure. I mean,
Yeah,
if we're
that's why,
not coming-
there is no rush.
Okay.
There's no rush.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.